Hi everybody. I'm back again. So I wanted to share this interesting dream that I had last night, and I've been watching several channels, as I'm sure many of you do, just like myself. And I've been watching Repo Man 64's latest videos on the days of Noah, and he's got watch his last few videos because he goes into a lot of detail with the various timelines, but in particular, the one with the equilux, the Enoch calendar with the equilux being the start date. But, anyways, he's focusing now on the days of Noah, and it says, as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. So that's a huge clue in the Bible that Christ's coming, his rapture or the rapture will be as the days of Noah. Well, anyways, I had this Star Wars dream last night. I mean, I couldn't even sleep, and it was so unusual that I thought I'd go ahead and present it here, at least for you guys to hear what my dream was about. But so with Mike's stuff, Repo Man 64, he's talking about, the flood came on, Noah's flood came on the 17th day of the second month, which is Cheshvan, or some people say Heshvan. And then he's talking about that Methuselah died 7 days before the onset of the flood. So that would have been the 10th of Sheshvan. And you can watch Repo Man 64's channel because he goes into a lot more detail than I'm presenting. I'm just stating that fact here. Well, anyways, so if any of you guys also watch Interrupts 165 and Ministry Revealed, they actually discuss in many of their videos about the Synoptic Gospels, Luke, Mark, and Matthew, where Luke group or the book of Luke represents the bride, Mark represents the left behind, and Matthew is the Jews. So they also talk about that Christ said that the last will be first and the first will be last. In other words, the sequence will be in reverse. Luke being first, which is the bride. Then Mark's group will go through the sealed judgments, which is the left behind sleeping church. And then Matthew will go through the trumpet judgments, which are the Jews. But anyways, the bride is associated with Luke's group. So anyways, in Mike Repo Man 64 also discusses about Jacob being married to Leah and Rachel. And he loved Rachel and wanted to marry her, but Laban, their father, said that he played a trick on Jacob, and actually he ended up being married to Leah firstly. Her being that he said that the elder must precede the younger Rachel. So he ends up being married to Leah, and then 7 days later he marries Rachel. And Repo Man 64 goes into this and clarifies that it wasn't 7 years later. And in fact, I believe that to be the case because I found there's a bride price to be paid when a woman marries a man. He had to first pay the father a bride price, and there's a Jewish term for it. But although Laban, which is their father, allowed Jacob to marry Rachel, he did this before he worked off his full debt being married to Leah. So he did in fact marry Rachel 7 days later, although she didn't have her first child until the end of 7 years. But anyways, I just want to describe what Repo Man 64 has been talking about in his last few videos, along with some other stuff, which is what my dream is about, and I'll go into that here. So let me back up. So to summarize everything, Leia represents the bride, which is a part of Luke's group. And if you want to check out Interrupts 165 in Ministry Revealed, they have the first group that is raptured, which is pre-trib, which is Luke, the bride of Christ. Then mid-trib is the second group, which is Mark, and that's the left behind and the sleeping church. And then the third group that goes through the trumpet and the seal judgments, that's the Jews. And if you look at Luke 13, verse 30, it says, and indeed, and this is Christ speaking, there are last who will be first and the first who will be last. So that's why it's in the reverse order, rather than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's Luke, Mark, and Matthew. Then, like I said, Repo Man 64's channel points out the distinction between the marriages with Leia and Rachel, and Leia is mentioned as being the bride, and Rachel is mentioned as being the wife. So the first group, or the pre-trib, the bride of Christ, which is Leia, is in the first group, which was with Luke. So this is when I had the dream about Star Wars with Luke and Leia. And I thought this was a really wild dream. So in the dream, all it was is that with Star Wars, Luke and Leia that look at the release date of when this was first came out. So I was actually alive and went to one of the first viewings of it back in 1977, but it was released on May 25th, 1977. And again, or rather, I believe that Satan and the powers of evil know the times better than we do, the historical dates, the correct calendar, etc., because Satan was actually there. We can only guess within a time frame that's presented historically, and so stuff is not as accurate, whereas Satan knows the exact date and the exact calendar. But again, like I said, Leia is the bride and represented as a part of Luke's group. So there's Luke and Leia in the movie Star Wars, which was presented on May 25th, 1977. So my dream was rather short, and all I gleaned from it is I just need to look at Star Wars, because that's Luke and Leia, which is the bride, and it's from the Synoptic Gospel of Luke, and look at the date that Star Wars came out, which was May 25th, 1977, A New Hope. If you look at 30 years earlier, it would be May 25th, 1947, while 75 years after that date would be May 25th, 2022, excuse me. So the 1060th year would be in May of 1947 instead of 48. I don't know why that was, but then the 1290th year was in May of 77, the release year of Star Wars, and then the 1335th year would be in May 25th, 2022. So I didn't see any importance on that, but I did see, based on Repo Man 64's Noatic timeline, his first timeline, based on the Equilux and the Enoch calendar, May 25th on that calendar ends up being the 70th day, or Savan 10. But if you look at that in terms of as the days of Noah were, it would be offset 6 months, and that would then fall on Kislev 10. But Kislev 10 is 1 month later than the death of Methuselah, which was on Sheshvan 10. So this is the next month. So it's 1 month offset later. So Repo Man 64 finds on his timeline that the date of the flood ends up being on Halloween, October 31st, where Methuselah died 7 days earlier, which would be October 24th. So my dream goes on to state that I need to look at Star Wars, to look at the release date of the film, and there's a connection indeed to what Repo Man 64 has with his Noahic timeline with Methuselah and stuff, and he also ties that in with the 6 months earlier with the resurrection of Jesus that's mentioned with his first and second visitation with Thomas in the upper room, but his first visit was with the 11 apostles or disciples, and Thomas wasn't there in the upper room, and that was on the same day that he resurrected in the evening, and the doors were shut, and then Thomas came later, and Jesus appeared 8 days later, so 7 days after his first day, on the 8th day, in which Thomas was there. And so Repo Man 64 was saying he's been trying to hash this out for years. But anyways, this is what came to me in the dream. Sorry that I'm presenting this pretty convoluted, but I went and looked at John 20, on which Jesus did appear after his resurrection to the apostles. So in John 20, verse 19, it says, "Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the apostles were assembled, so for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, 'Peace be with you.'" So he appeared to all of the apostles minus Thomas. Doubting Thomas is where that came from. Then it goes on to say in verse 26, "And after 8 days," so a week later, "his disciples were again inside, but this time with Thomas with them. Jesus came, and the doors being shut, and stood in the midst and said, 'Peace be with you.' And this time Thomas was there and got to see Jesus. But Mike was saying that there's the 7 days that he was having problem with. So I read this passage before I went to bed and asked the Lord for revelation. So I went back to see what happened between that first visit, the first day with his apostles, and then on the 8th day, after 8 days, Thomas was with them and Jesus came again the second time. But if you read in between there, it says in verse 24, "Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came." So that's a really odd statement that's just kind of thrown in between Jesus' first visitation and then his second visitation on after 8 days when Thomas was there. It just throws in this random, but nothing's random in the Bible. So I think this is a code that Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So if you look at the constellations, the one constellation that represents the twin is Gemini, and that's one of the 12 constellations. So what was revealed to me in my dream, and this is based on Repo Man 64's timeline, it ended up being Kislev 10, which was 1 month later, but based on the fact that Thomas wasn't there, one of the 12 Mazzaroth signs being the twin, so that means that it was moved back instead 1 month. So in other words, it goes from Savan 10, 1 month back, because Thomas wasn't there. There was only the 11 constellations, in other words. And so that moves it back from Savan 10 to a month earlier, being Iyar 10. And then if you offset it, the Iyar 10, based on the Noah's calendar, as in the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Iyar 10, 6 months offset, then goes to Sheshvan 10, and that being the day that Methuselah died on October 24th. And that would be when Leah, the bride group, or that's a part of Luke's group, would be raptured. So on October 24th. And that was in agreement with Repo Man 64 being the day that Methuselah died, October 24th, the door was open, but then the door wasn't closed until Halloween, October 31st, the day of the flood, on the Enoch Equilux timeline that Repo Man 64 presents. Now, I'm not saying it's thus said the Lord God, but that's what my dream was. And I emailed Mike on about this information, and I thought I at least put it out there. But it was interesting that StarWars came to mind. The release date, take a look at that, and then relate that to all of the stuff that Repo Man 64 has been presenting lately. And again, if you want to know why Luke is a part of the bride group, then look at the channel Interrupts 165 and Ministry Revealed, because they go into that in much greater detail. And many of you are probably familiar with that if you watch pretty much the same channels that I do. So now, on a separate note, I want to show you this stuff that goes back to the time after the Revelation 12 sign in 2017. I think we're having a 5-year grace period before stuff actually occurs. I might make this into a separate video, but I thought I'd tag this towards the end. But I think the two witnesses could possibly show up on October 18th, so I'll show you why. So this is October 14th, 2017, but if you watch Jupiter in particular, so on the 18th, there was a very close conjunction. In fact, that was mentioned in like sky.org and all this other stuff, that it was less than a degree apart, that there was a Mercury Jupiter conjunction on October 18th of 2017. 5 years later would be October 18th of 2020. The reason I believe this might be the two witnesses is based on, so in Acts 14:12, it says in the King James Version, and they called Barnabas Jupiter and Paul Mercurius, which is the Roman word for Mercury, because he was the chief speaker. Barnabas was the person that went along with Paul as his disciple, and he was Jewish, while Paul represents the Gentiles. So the Jupiter and Mercury conjunction may be a fulfillment coming up on October 18th of Acts 14:12. Then when you go back into Stellarium and you go forward from October 18th, again looking at Jupiter, here's Hydra, which is the 7-headed serpent. So the dragon has 7 heads and 7 crowns upon his head. If you forward from there, you will all of a sudden see the comet 96P Mox Holtz from the comet's tail. This is October 22nd. Casting 1/3 of the stars towards the woman Virgo. So let's look at that again. So you see, prior to that time, it disappears, but then out of nowhere, on the 22nd of October, the serpent, or the seven-headed serpent, the dragon, cast the comet 96P Mox-Holt towards the woman, and then it disappears. So I think there's by October 31st, it disappears. So you can see it all the way through October 31st, just that little dot, and then afterwards it's pretty much invisible. So I think between also the 22nd, where it's at the dragon's tail, through October 31st, the dragon might cast 1/3 of the stars of heaven towards the woman, or that will be in fulfillment of Revelation 12. But the second sign, which is in Revelation verses 3-4, which reads, "And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads, and Hydra is known to have 7 heads, and 10 horns, and 7 diadems or crowns on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which is Virgo, who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born." So I think between October 22nd and the 31st, these passages will be then fulfilled, whereas in chapter 12, verses 1-2, that was fulfilled on September 23rd, 2017. This one then being the second sign that appeared in heaven, being 5 years later after the 5-year grace period. So I do see, again, another set of high watch dates between October 18th and Halloween, October 30th, which also includes Repo Man 64's October 24th, which was the day that Methuselah died, and he is suggesting that the bride of Christ may be raptured on that day, October 24th, which is the 10th day of Heshvan, the second month. I was also seeing in Stellarium, going back, the 2 witnesses possibly showing up on October 18th, the dragon casting 1/3 of the stars of heaven to the earth, or towards the woman, could be when they start maybe whether strategic or tactical nukes over in the conflict over there between Russia and the Ukraine, and then the possible rapture between the 24th and the 31st. Of course, I must say the caveat to this is I'm just saying this could happen on those dates, but I don't know that for sure. But I do believe they are high watch dates based on the heavenly signs and what other channels and watchmen and watchwomen are seeing. So anyways, I thought I put out my Star Wars dream. I'm sorry that this video is a bit rough and it's a little convoluted, but hopefully you understand the content at least, and it has at least been a blessing for you. But either way, the time is getting short. Even if nothing happens during this time period, this is still the time period in which to get saved and come to the Lord. You see for yourself, the handwriting is on the wall, even in the secular community, and on, you can't trust all of the news, but they're all doing this nuclear, preparation, nuclear overall in terms of nuclear preparedness. So anyways, don't delay coming to the Lord and getting saved. The time is too short, and tomorrow isn't even promised. So anyways, these are the high watch dates: October 18th, October 18th tomorrow through October 31st on Halloween. So I'm saying that the two witnesses was the sign with Jupiter and Mercury conjunction back in 2017, that being the 5-year grace period before 2022. Possible nuclear bomb attacks, whether tactical or hopefully not strategic, and then maybe the rapture. I'll leave it at this, and I thought the last one was my last video, but I guess not. But I wanted to bring that Star Wars dream to you and the information with Mike RepoMan64's channel. And I would suggest watching at least his last few videos, as they are, you can gather what I'm talking about more so with this video and his timeline. So I'll sign off from here, and I hope you have a blessed day. Take care.